Hello, Magic players. It's Gutler here, back again with another discussion of the Commander ban list that I want to talk about. And here's the card that I want to talk about, and it's Balance, right? Ooh, Balance. So if you don't know what Balance does, this is a foreign version, is the new one says each player chooses a number of lands that he or she controls equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest. Then sacrifices the rest. Players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. So what it does is whoever has the least lands, it will equalize everyone with that player. And then it's also true for cards in hand and creatures in play. So this is the kind of card, it's 2 mana, right? Very low mana cost, but it can have an effect where if you took it to the extreme, it is destroy all lands if someone has no lands, destroy all or sacrifice all lands, right? Sacrifice all creatures if somebody has no creatures, and everybody discards their whole hand because someone's hellbent and has no cards in hand, right? So this is like, whoa, isn't that crazy powerful? Um, yeah, it is, it's reasonably powerful. Like if you think of it as someone will have no land, someone will have no cards in hand, and someone will have no creatures, right? That's the kind of thing where it's like that's the worst case possible scenario of the card. However, I actually think that balance could be unbanned even after I laid out that argument that the worst case scenario is mind twist everybody, Armageddon everybody, and Wrath of God everybody. And that's because that worst case scenario is living in a dreamland that doesn't exist, right? Um, if you don't know, Game Nights, which is the Command Zone's um, gameplay series that they did a 2-part series where for the first part they drafted banned cards where they went around the ban list and they each picked, I want to play Leovold, I want to play Nadu, this card, this card, this card. And Rachel Weeks did draft balance, and she said, oh, balance is broken when she drafted it, so she took balance. And then in that game that they went ahead and played with the decks they made with the banned cards, and they didn't make CDH decks, right, that use banned cards. They made decks that were geared to be for bracket 3, but just included banned cards that they drafted as part of the fun exercise. Um, um, she did resolve balance in that game, and it was actually didn't even look like a good card. So when she resolved balance, um, uh, every player had one creature except she had two. Um, or there was someone who had a lot of creatures, but they phased them out. Um, she had one card in hand, and then basically everybody had 4 lands except the guy playing the Nadu deck, which had just ramped out a bunch of lands. Now I know that Game Night is it's designed to be an entertaining thing to watch. It's not the most cutthroat or um, hardcore version of the game where they're playing with no mistakes. But this is a game where they took balance in the draft, right? She took balance. She said balance is OP. I'm gonna demonstrate it. She played balance. It didn't really do that much. Balance was what I would term it is it's like the blue shell in Mario Kart. Like if somebody is running away with the game, they're way out in front, they have a ton of lands in play, a ton of cards in hand, or just a ton of creatures. You can play balance and it will equalize things back down to a normal level, right? Um, you don't have that running over the game anymore where they used to be. And from my observation, I think that makes balance like a card. Hey, maybe we actually do want this in, um, bracket 3 and bracket 4 games, and even bracket 5 games, because this is the kind of thing we want. We don't want someone to be running away with the game where they're just way out in front and you can't do anything, right? We want Rays to rein that in. And I don't think that it's fair to keep balance banned based on the worst case scenario that could happen if it resolved and for some reason somebody had no cards, somebody had no lands, and somebody had no creatures, right? Where it just kills everything, right? Um, Part of my argument for that is that the idea that balance can do that, it'd be a one card game ender, which is what the old rules committee called it. It was just a one card game ender. You do it, it destroys everything. Nobody has anything. You win, right? The idea was you play balance, you play a bunch of mana rocks, right? You just throw your hand on the table, you get hell bent, and then you play balance, and then it ruins everyone's hand, and they don't have lands because you didn't play lands, you just played mana rocks, right? Um, I think that is a fake scenario that doesn't really work. Now, what's my evidence for it to be a fake scenario? Well, one, my first bit of evidence is balance is not a universally banned card, right? It's banned in Commander, but there are other formats in which balance is legal, right? Let's take a look at some of those formats. So, for the first one, we have Vintage. Of course, it's restricted in Vintage because if you wasn't, you could play 4 copies, but it is restricted and you can play 1 copy in Vintage. Now, do any Vintage decks actually play Balance? I've looked at Vintage lists. I could not find a single Vintage deck that played Balance, right? There were no Vintage decks. Now, Vintage is also a format that you think would be even better at taking advantage of that crazy loophole with balance where you can just play mana rocks, have no cards in hand, then play the balance, and then it resolves, and then your opponent has no lands, no creatures, and no card in hand because it did it all because it's equalized everything except the artifacts, and you had a bunch of artifacts out. Now, Vintage actually has a lot more good fast mana cards that are legal in their format, right? They have Black Lotus, they have the 5 ABU Moxen, they've got all kinds of stuff that you can play. They have Mana Crypt, um, that you could play that could get you an early balance and do that play. However, vintage decks aren't doing that, right? They have the ability to include balance and play it. However, it's not something that vintage decks are interested in doing. They don't play the card. It's basically it has zero play in vintage. It's kind of just a legacy thing that's on the ban list. Um, so that's my first argument is it's not played in that format. Now, what about another format that has access to also broken fast mana and is even a Highlander format like ours is, where they only have one of each card? Well, if we look at Canadian Highlander, balance is a legal card, right? Well, basically every card is legal in Canadian Highlander. They instead of using a band list, they use a point system, so you have to spend your points to include or not include a card. Now, balance currently is a pointed card. It has 1 point. Balance does, in the history of Canadian Highlander points, it does tend to go from 0 to 1 point to 0 points to 1 point to 0 points again to 1 point. So balance has like a history of it just keeps sliding. It's considered a powerful card. They move it to 0 points. It slides out of um, it slides out, then they put it back in, then it slides out again. So it's the kind of thing where like Balance is a card that's legal in the format. They also have access to ABU Moxen and Black Lotus, although those are high pointed cards, right? Um, However, the effective balance doesn't seem to be a card that, they didn't put it at 7 points where it's like, oh my gosh, balance is crazy. You see it resolve, it ruins the game, right? No, we've seen a balance resolve, right? We saw it in the Game Nice episode, and it just looked like a bad card. It looked like a card that could only really affect someone who was way out in first place, and then it could bring them back down where it says, oh, you've ramped too much, you have too many cards in hand, or you have too many creatures. This is going to equalize things. So now it's going to be a fair field, right, where decks can come back. So I'm not even a player who plays white decks. I don't. None of my white decks would want to run balance. It's more a control card. My only deck with white in it right now is a very aggressive deck. It doesn't care about balance. Doesn't care about removal. Its strategy is, oh, you have a threatening creature or something that's stopping me. Well, I'm just going to give my board menace and then attack you for 45, and then that'll be enough, right? That's the plan. Um, but uh, Balance, I think, is a card that we could see unbanned based on those few factors, right? It's We've seen it in play in Commander. It did not look broken. It looked actually kind of fair to did not look like a broken card. Like we saw a lot of other banned cards played in that game nights game, and they looked like they deserved to be on the ban list, right? Nadu, Leovold, um, Recurring Nightmare, Dockside Extortionist, those cards looked like, okay, these should be banned and stay banned. Fierce Guardianship was played multiple times. That was a card that looked like it should be banned, even though it's legal. Balance, which is banned, did not look like it should be banned. It looked like, it looked like it's worse than uh, quite a few amount of, like, Farewell would have probably been a better card, right? Just Farewell all modes, way better than Balance resolving, because Balance leaves your opponents with things, right? It only actually gets rid of everything if there's none of the thing in play, right? If there's some amount of lands, some amount of creatures, or some amount of cards in hand, people just go down to their best ones, and that's still fine, right? I think that's fine. Um, so I looked at balance and I go, "Ah, I don't think it's ban worthy. Like it did just doesn't look good, right? It doesn't, it's not passing the, uh, okay, this card is broken in Commander. Let's look at it in other formats and it will look broken in those formats too, right? If we look at, like, balance it's completely absent from Vintage. It's basically absent from Canadian Highlander, right? I couldn't find any Canadian Highlander decks that were playing balance as a card, right? And it's not like it looks like those decks are going to be, turn one, Mox, 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 Black Lotus, tap everything, resolve balance, your opponents have nothing in play, you just win right away. So there's a card I think, hey, why, if we're gonna keep it banned, right? We should at least do a trial unban of balance. Like, this is the kind of thing where I know the Pauper format panel is famous for doing these trial unbans. Gavin runs that panel. Gavin also runs the Commander format panel. I think I'd like to see a world in which balance just goes either in a trial and ban and becomes a game changer, or just goes unbanned and made a game changer. It's not even a card I want to use. It's just a card where, when I see it and I see the effect of it and I see the comparison with other formats in which it's legal, it seems like this is the kind of thing where people are saying, oh, we can't ban balance. If you look at it in the worst possible light, you put on, we have rose colored glasses to look at things that are in, like, you're looking at something and you're like, I'm looking at it in the best possible light. I'm giving it all the reasonable doubt in the world, right? It looks like we're looking at balance, and we're not looking with rose colored glasses. We're looking with anti-rose colored glasses. We're looking with, I don't know, some, really, really dark glasses where we're seeing, it's like, oh, when you play it, it's always going to have its most strong possible effect will be the effect that occurs. It will Armageddon all your opponents and mind twist them for their whole hand and wrath all their creatures away, and you'll be the only one left with permanence in play. It's like that, like, in practice we saw the card resolve in a real game, and that's just not what it did. It 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 was the blue shell that hit the guy in first place. He had to sack some lands, he had to discard some cards. He didn't actually lose his creatures because he was able to phase them out, but even if he did, it would have been okay for him to lose his creatures because he got to keep his best ones. And then the other two players in the game were largely unaffected by the balance, right? They got to keep their creature, they got to keep their land. They either had low enough cards in hand, or they only had to discard a few cards. So it was just the kind of thing where the real evidence that we have of how the card works is so far different from how the community thinks it could work, that I think it really should be trial unbanned or just unbanned, because there's not really a case in which it does the most extreme thing regularly. Like, it's just not going to do that, right? It's not going to, you're not going to have games that are, someone on their turn plays all six cards in their hand out because they're all mana rocks, and then they get to play balance, and then you have no hand on turn one or something. And it's like, what? That just, like, it's just not going to happen, right? Um, and I think that we really need to look at commander cards in this average play experience, because cards are always going to have, they're always going to exist on a range of playability. You're going to have the all right, it does the most powerful thing it could possibly do, right? And then it's going to have the bottom of the range where it's okay, I top decked it on turn 12 and it doesn't do anything and I still lose the game, right? It can do nothing or it can do everything. And they always, they do not exist at like a binary where they're one or the other, right? They exist in the middle of the spectrum, right? And they exist in a range of things. Now, is balance going to exist at the higher end where it usually, like, it just takes the game away from all the opponents because they all lose all their agency because they have to discard or sack creatures or sack some extra lands, right? I doubt it. I think that's a very extreme case that it would usually do that. It seems like it's more like a middle feature where, or a low feature where it's going to affect. It's just going to be a card that you play it. It will have you'll have a opponent who's strong, who'll be the most affected opponent, and the other opponents are affected, to lesser degrees. So um, they'll just have less that they can do with, balance did not take away that much for them because they didn't have that much they were doing anyway. So with the fact that things are equalized, right, lands, creatures, and cards are now equalized, does not actually rob their deck of their, what they were doing, right? Because they were just, they were kind of circling the drain, losing, and now that you've blue shelled the player out in first place, now they're like, well, maybe I could win, right? I could drop deck, I could, I got to keep. I had three creatures, I only had to sack one. I have my two really good ones, right? Maybe those will go be able to do things. Especially now that the guy who had 10 creatures, now he's only got two, right? That's the kind of thing um, where this card could be actually be very good and fair and fun in casual games in bracket 3 and, even high power games in bracket 4. And I don't think it's going to see CDH play because I just don't think, if it was a CDH card where you could go ahead and, just cast it extremely early and just win off that, I think it would see a lot of play in Canadian Highlander and Vintage. And it just doesn't. It's just a completely absent card. There's no reason for it to be, it's on the restricted list just so you can't play 4 copies, but nobody's even going in and playing the first copy. It's just not a card that people want. They don't want that effect, right? Um, so that's my take. I think let's look at balance. I think balance might actually be balanced, right? I don't think it's gonna be a OP card that can ruin the game and just run away with things the way it's speculated. And I think that matches a lot of the arguments that led to other cards being unbanned in the past, right? We had cases where the card Metalworker, right? People always argue that, oh, Metalworker's way too much mana too quickly, right? You play Metalworker on turn 3 or turn 2, right? Or if you have something, and then the next turn you play your land, you reveal your hand. It's 5 artifacts. You just cast whatever you want, whatever big 10-drop artifact you want. Blightsteel Colossus or whatever, and then you just won the game right there. And it's like it just doesn't do that in practice. Like Metalworker it's a fine card. It's not a game changer. It's not played that much. It's played mostly in full mono brown or colorless decks, right, where they're trying to just have as many artifacts as possible. Even if you play a deck with a high artifact count, like if you're like at 25 or 30 artifacts, that might not be enough artifacts. It really has to be like a full colorless mono brown deck where you're playing like 50 or more artifacts for it to actually be kind of a good card, right? So that's the thing where it's like, yeah, Metalworker, people always treated Metalworker like it was the worst possible way that Metalworker would work, right? The same thing with Panoptic Mirror, right? We had Panoptic Mirror. People always treated Panoptic Mirror like, oh, if they have Panoptic Mirror, they're going to play it, immediately imprint Time Magic, and just immediately end the game, right? It's just always infinite turn combo with Panoptic Mirror. That's just always what happens, and it's nothing else happens, right? And then we see Panoptic Mirror gets unbanned. Panoptic Mirror doesn't make any waves. Very few people want to play it. It doesn't really fit in to the kind of games people want to play. They don't put, you don't see degenerate stuff imprinted on Panoptic Mirror. You don't even hardly see Panoptic Mirror played. So it's the kind of card where, um, if you look at Panoptic Mirror and you say, well, the worst possible situation is they play mirror, they pass, it goes around the table, and then on their upkeep they respond to the mirror trigger with the imprint of the extra turn, and then unless you had an instant speed artifact kill, they just instantly win, right? Um, that's the worst case scenario, and it just doesn't happen, right? So the idea that we evaluate balance on the worst case scenario, and that would be what happens, I think that has to be incorrect, right? There's no way balance is working on its worst case scenario. Balance is, it has to just be somewhere in the middle of that range, and it's probably like towards the middle or to the bottom, where it's a card where, yeah, it's a removal spell, yeah, it's 2 mana, yeah, you don't get to choose what you kill, it's just sort of like you know the worst things in play are going to die, right? And because people get to sacrifice and select, so they get to choose what they want to keep. And the thing is that it's just not going to be that overpowered, right? I don't even think it's going to be that powerful. So I think we could totally unban balance and make it a game changer. And that's my case. I'm going to lay it out there. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this rambling video, and I hope we will speak again, sometime soon. I'd love to do a deck tech for you guys, or maybe talk about the next CFP update whenever they come out with either more unbans, bans, or changes to the bracket system and game changer list. So I hope you have a wonderful day and a great night, and thanks for coming to this thing. Bye for now, everybody.